GM, welcome to Web3 Academy, your trusted source for relevant and legitimate Web3 information so you don't fall behind the internet revolution. I'm Jaybird, and I believe that Web3 is going to change the world. That's why I'm here to guide the world's top talent down the rabbit hole as you contribute, participate, and capitalize on the opportunity. Today, we're talking about KlimaDAO. We're talking about how do we fight this massive problem of climate change. And one of the ways to do this, probably the best way if you listen to this episode, is through carbon offsets. Now, the carbon offset market has huge problems of inefficiency, of lack of verification and trust. What do we know? What does blockchain do? It makes things more efficient. It allows trustlessness, which means that you don't need to bring in third parties to trust. You can just trust. And so KlimaDAO is bringing the carbon market on chain. And we're going to talk about how they're doing that and how this is going to really change the world. This is going to possibly be a massive solution for climate change. What's incredible is everybody keeps asking what the use cases are for Web3. Like, what's the real use case? Like, we know crypto, we know DeFi, we all get that. A lot of us are using that and it's fantastic and it works, but that's the monetary revolution. Everyone wants to know, what's the internet revolution? How is Web3 going to change the internet? Give me a real use case. Well, today's episode is going to give you exactly that. Not only is this a real use case, today's guest, Atmosfearful, says that his belief is that the carbon market, is going to be the largest onboarding ramp for new users in Web3 in 2023. So you're going to want to stick around to the end to understand how that's going to happen and why he's projecting that. That's a bold statement. We don't talk a lot about the carbon market being the one that's going to onboard users, but when he breaks down the way that they are presenting a new form of a marketplace on chain and what that enables, you'll definitely understand. So today joining us is Atmosfearful from KlimaDAO. He is the head of engineering there. He's worked in the carbon market for several years as an engineer and an entrepreneur, and he's focused on building a new product at KlimaDAO, which launches on April 4th, and that is Carbon Mark. And so he'll be spearheading Carbon Mark. As he likes to say, he's here for the carbon, not the crypto. This is a must-listen episode if you ask me, because we need to deal with climate change. And at the beginning of this episode, Atmos is going to break down exactly how bad the problem is and how it's exponentially increasing the problem itself. It's only going to get worse and worse if we do not act, and we must act. And this episode presents a way that we can all act, either as individuals or as organizations. So you're going to enjoy this one. Thanks so much for listening in, everybody. Before we do jump into this episode, we need to take a minute to hear from our sponsors who make this show possible.
The future of social media is here, and that future lives in Web3 on top of Lens protocol. Web2 social platforms are broken and ripe for disruption. You see, the epicenter of social media is the creators, and yet they are the most neglected. Web2 platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram are all essentially robbing creators of their worth. Creators are a new type of entrepreneur, forming new types of businesses. Yet with Web2 platforms, creators don't own their content or the profiles, and that's their product and business. Instead, they are tied to the platforms they choose to create on. Well, just like how crypto is freeing us from banks, Web3 is freeing us from these centralized platforms. On Lens protocol, creators own their content, own their profile, and even their social graph and followers in the form of NFTs. This allows you to move freely from one social application to another with your content, profile, and followers moving along with you. Lens protocol enables self-sovereignty for your social graph and interoperability across the internet. At Web3 Academy, we believe this is the future of social, and that's why we've partnered with Lens to ensure that the path of social media is heading in the right direction. Visit lens.xyz to learn more today.
Shared ownership is revolutionizing the way we think of digital ownership.
Did you know that you can benefit from the utility of a Bored Ape Yacht Club, CryptoPunk, or Azuki without actually spending tens of thousands of dollars to buy it? How? By buying an access key to the asset. You see, with Segment, you can now buy and hold parts of an expensive NFT and share in its ownership and utility, like airdrops or exclusive access. As an owner of a high-profile NFT, you can distribute ownership with access keys and create liquidity for yourself. It's a win-win situation. Plus, the ownership and transfer of these keys are managed on-chain, which ensures transparency and security. And we want the Web3 Academy community to be on the forefront of this new wave of NFT utility, which is why we partner with Segment, a non-custodial NFT platform set to launch in Q3 of this year. Segment aims to allow users to easily create access keys and share ownership of NFTs with other friends and community members. The team is going through their beta release soon and has opened up their waitlist for Web3 Academy listeners. If you want to stay on the forefront of Web3, sign up for Segment's waitlist today with the link in the show notes below. Shared ownership is a game changer, and we want you to be there first.
Atmosfearful from KlimaDAO, welcome to the show. So excited to have you today.
Hey Jay, thanks so much for having me.
This is going to be an awesome episode, one I personally have been very excited for a long time, because obviously, I care deeply about climate change and protecting our planet. And KlimaDAO's, I've been following you guys. You guys have just been shipping and doing so many good things. So let's start the show there. What's the mission of KlimaDAO? Why did you and a bunch of people get together? When did you get together to start KlimaDAO?
Good question. So there's so much to unpack. The DAOs, like you said, we're shipping like crazy. We're doing so much, but the overall vision, the kind of guiding light for us, we want to accelerate delivery of climate finance to sustainability projects, right? So how we're doing that, we're scaling carbon markets, and we can unpack carbon markets in better detail later on. Mm-hmm. But really, we're trying to build liquidity on chain. We're tokenizing carbon assets. We're aligning incentives so that quality carbon can come on chain, so people have access to it. So ultimately, sustainability projects worldwide get greater access to finance. We can fight climate change.
Incredible. And we are going to dive into some of these topics deeper, but let's just stay at the high level in KlimaDAO for a second. I should ask it, KlimaDAO or KlimaDAO?
KlimaDAO.
Why the K? Where does it come from?
It's Greek. It's Greek for climate. Yeah. That was a shout out to Archimedes for coming up with that name.
Shout out to Archimedes. You're the first person to ever give a shout out to Archimedes. Okay. Take us back just for a second to the origin of KlimaDAO. When did KlimaDAO start? And maybe what have you guys achieved today at a high level? I know you guys have done so much, but just give us some high level numbers of what you've achieved today.
So I guess we were basically a bunch of entrepreneurs working on different projects in the carbon market and DeFi spaces. And we came together because we all sort of saw the same opportunity here. We saw the real advantage that Web3 and DeFi can bring. We saw an opportunity to align incentives using protocols in the same way that Olympus did, and to sort of incentivize carbon to come on chain that way. So that's where it all started, and it worked. And we've brought so far 17 million tons of carbon or carbon liquidity into our treasury as a DAO. Wow. We've got about 40 full-time contributors working with us, and many more working part-time or taking bounties.
Wow.
Yeah. So more impact than any of us could have imagined within, the last year and a half. I think total, there've been about 25 million credits tokenized. And keeping my ego in check, but I don't think any of this would have happened without KlimaDAO. So we're very proud of what we've accomplished. Now the focus is more on building out the tooling, making it easier for people to interact with what we're calling the digital carbon market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we're going to jump into how you guys are building out that tooling in this really exciting new launch that you have, and breaking that down in this episode. But first, I just have to ask your name, Atmosfearful. So you're anonymous, you're the first anonymous person ever to come on the podcast. So it's kind of exciting to have an Anon. Surprising that in Web3, you're our first Anon in a way. Where does the name Atmosfearful come from? Great name, by the way.
I wish I had a good origin story. It came through, I needed something climate related. I needed to get on Discord. They told me, hey, we're doing this anonymous. I said, all right, if you say so. And that's what I came up with. So yeah, I appreciate you guys letting me come on anonymous. It's a little awkward for me. I'd kind of rather be here with my real name, and it's not like I have anything to hide. But the anonymity for me, it's really security through obscurity. It's peace of mind. I get the feeling I have a target on my back as a developer for a treasury that has so much carbon and USDC in it. So that helps me sleep at night, knowing I've separated my person from my online profile. And of course, there's like this spirit of trustlessness, of privacy, don't trust, verify. It's all on chain. It's all driven by smart contracts. So you don't need to know who I am.
Obviously, you've dedicated yourself to climate change and fighting climate change for even before you joined KlimaDAO, but you obviously really care about the climate. And I think we all do, but we don't all necessarily, it's not top of mind for us, right? We don't necessarily day-to-day understand or really have the ability to put into words what the issue is with the climate. So just let's set some context. Remind us of how serious this problem is with the climate and what the potential disastrous outcomes are if we don't act.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up, because it is really important. And I think I'll try and frame it in a way that we can actually connect to the solutions to climate change and then to our solution to climate change. So very, very top, climate change is the ultimate environmental issue at a time when we have a lot of environmental issues, right? Deforestation, biodiversity plummeting everywhere, oceans acidifying, desertification, soil degradation, on and on and on. All of those issues are exacerbated by climate change. So we can't solve anything until we solve climate change. In that sense, it's priority number one. But there's a detail that I think needs to be mentioned more, and it's the negative feedback loop of climate change. It's the idea that we're not just facing a warming planet, but we're facing runaway warming. That's what's really scary, and why I wanted to stay focused on climate change in my career. So let me just highlight what those feedback loops are for those who maybe have never heard of this concept. So the first feedback loop is Arctic sea ice. We're emitting carbon, we're enhancing the greenhouse gas effect, atmosphere is warming, so ice is melting, but ice reflects sunlight. So when there's less ice, the rate of heat absorption in the ocean increases, so the rate of ice melting increases. So there you have a positive feedback loop. Same thing with thawing permafrost, right? Permafrost is basically frozen soil, frozen biomass. As it melts, it decomposes and releases methane. And methane is 20 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than CO2. So the rate of permafrost melting is increasing as a feedback loop. Same for ocean acidification. I don't think a lot of people know that the ocean is actually the biggest carbon sink. So as atmospheric CO2 levels increase, the ocean is absorbing an increasing amount of those, but it absorbs it in the form of carbonic acid, which reduces ocean pH. So this is disrupting the biology of the ocean and the natural chemistry of the ocean in complex ways that actually lead to more warming. Forest degradation, of course, forest fires, desertification of forests, pests causing forest degradation even without human intervention. So obviously less forests, less carbon absorption. And then the fifth feedback loop is water vapor. So as temperatures rise, we have more evaporation, humidity increases, and the greenhouse gas effect gets stronger. So these are sort of 5 feedback loops that we really don't want to mess with. It's a problem. We aren't just dealing with humans emitting carbon, but we're really rolling the dice on setting off a chain of events that we can never undo. And that's why I think climate change is so scary and so important. Mm-hmm. And that also relates to solutions.
Before we jump into solutions,
sure,
I just want to come back to what you said is basically these 5 feedback loops, as you call them, are exponentially becoming worse. So the more time that we do not act, then the faster climate change is going to happen, and the more natural disasters, the more issues, the more impact on our planet is going to take place. So it's not only is it getting worse every day, it's getting exponentially worse every day. So as you said, it's putting us in a position where we might never be able to reverse it. I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people shy away from talking about it, because right now, I get a feeling in my gut that's like, it's so scary that I think it makes a lot of mainstream people sort of say, oh, I'd rather not think about that. That's just too scary. It's amazing how serious the problem is. And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way right now. Just really gut-wrenching, terrifying position that we're in. But that's why we have KlimaDAO and you on the show today is to tell us, okay, so let's go to solutions, as you just brought up. How do we fix this? How do we act?
Well, I mean, because I highlighted the fact that we're really rolling the dice here, the longer we wait, I think that highlights the need to act now and not wait for technology to save us. So there really is a sort of techno-savior mentality in a lot of climate solutions discussions, where whether it's nuclear fusion or waiting for the cost of solar to fall low enough or, new battery tech to come out, like at some point the technology will be there to reduce our carbon emissions, but we're really playing with fire, waiting for it. And so to understand, what the optimal climate solutions are, we just sort of unpack the type of problem that climate change is. So I kind of highlighted the need to solve climate change, but there's some nuance here, and climate change is a really unique problem. So I think obviously human emissions of greenhouse gases are causing climate change. There's no debate about that anymore. It's mostly from energy consumption. It's also from agriculture and some other subcategories, but mostly energy consumption. And so you have to ask, why are we consuming energy? We're doing it to maintain a high standard of living. That's really it. We burn energy to keep our houses warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And we burn energy to travel further and faster, more comfortably, and to eat better food, So that's why we consume energy. We already can frame this as an economic problem, right? It's a global development problem. It relates to our standard of living and the lifestyles we live and the things we buy. It's an economic problem. So it's not really a behavioral problem or a scientific or technological problem. It's the perfect example of something called an economic externality. And I think that's a word I'll use a lot in this podcast that I hope people get familiar with. So what is an economic externality? It's a cost that's incurred on someone outside of a transaction. Let me give another more simple example of an externality. Lead in gasoline. At some point, we discovered that putting lead in gasoline had a lot of economic benefits. If I remember correctly, engines run better, they don't knock as much, and I think you get more mileage out of a gallon of gasoline. So that's pure benefit. You would pay more to put lead in your gasoline, right? You might even save money doing that. So there's an economic benefit, but there's a cost to people who aren't in that transaction. So not me paying for the gas and not the gas company selling me that gas, but the person on the side of the road who's breathing that leaded gas fume, right? Suffering from brain damage, stroke, cancer, whatever, lead poisoning. And those economic externalities cost like trillions of dollars to the point where most countries just outright banned leaded gasoline. So the point is, lead in gasoline is an example of an economic externality that's really similar to the one we're dealing with climate change, right?
Right.
And the key is capitalism doesn't solve externalities on its own. That's why they exist in the first place, right? They require regulation. The person buying the leaded gas, the company selling it, neither of them would have decided to stop. Right. It's only government who can step in. The benefits were huge, like trillions of dollars in savings and countless lives saved, et cetera. So climate change is the same, but it's also different in a way. Climate change is harder to solve than leaded gas. And economic externalities they're already really hard to solve because they require political coordination. Government has to step in. You got to get politicians aligned. And the people who are making the money are going to resist it, of course. I'm sure the gas companies resisted, and even the people buying gas weren't too happy about it, the ban. So same with climate change. But climate change is it's what we call temporally distant. It's across time. It's not, the externality isn't a cost on the guys standing on the side of the road. It's a cost on a future generation. Right. People who might not even be born yet are going to have to pay the cost of this externality. And it's also geographically distant. So we're talking about an issue that spans borders, and we're talking about impacts that will affect different countries differently. Poor countries will be impacted way worse than rich ones. And rich countries, if we decide to tackle climate change, will have to pay more, right? They'll suffer more of the impact of solving climate change. So there's sort of a mismatch here, right? A conflict of interest. And of course, it requires countries to cooperate despite those conflicts of interest. So I hope I'm doing a good job of illustrating like this unique economic theory behind climate change. And then maybe can try and tie in the solutions, right?
I was going to say, so you scare me even more because of the economic externalities. It's even harder to deal with because, as you said, the people who need to deal with it aren't the people who are involved with it every day and necessarily aren't the ones that are impacted by it. And so we need to work together. We need to do things that we are not good at doing currently, and that our tech is also not set up to do well. So does that lead us into a discussion of what do we do? How do we solve this? Give us a light at the end of the tunnel here.
Sure. Here we go. So obviously we need to internalize the externality. Like I mentioned with leaded gas, we need government to step in. So the most efficient solution, if you ask climate economists, carbon tax. So you literally calculate how much does this cost as an externality, and you make people pay it. Maybe a fixed tax on every ton of carbon, or maybe, there are a bunch of ways to spin this, but slightly less efficient, you might do something like cap and trade. So you set limits on carbon and you make people buy credits and trade them if they exceed their limits, or sell them if they don't use up their limit. And then of course there's top-down regulation. You could just ban carbon emissions, which probably will never happen. And then less efficient, you have things like government subsidies. So that means paying for positive externalities, like maybe the government's putting up money for electric vehicles and for solar panels, not really tackling the problem itself, but trying to combat it in other ways. But the bottom line is we have to make polluting more expensive. Otherwise, we'll never solve the problem. And we have to internalize the externalities. So this is why I'm so excited about carbon offsetting, which I think it's a weird thing to hear, right? People don't say that very often, like they're excited about carbon offsetting. But I really am.
Why?
I'm confident. I still have faith. We're going to see the government regulations we need, and we're going to see that international cooperation. Like people are working on this. But even when we do, it's not always going to be possible to eliminate all your emissions. It never will be. There's always going to be carbon emissions. And so that begs the question, right? Like, what if companies want to internalize the cost of their emissions, even before the regulations happen, but also after, right? What if like investors and asset managers want their portfolio companies to do that? What if consumers are demanding that the things they buy are carbon neutral or carbon negative? Or like, what if people are willing to pay more for carbon neutral? I think this is where offsets fit in. So, so offsets make all of that possible. And in summary, maybe someone doesn't know what an offset is. I should probably define it really quick. An offset's a credit that represents verified removal or avoidance of 1 ton of carbon emissions. If you want to go carbon neutral, you can buy, and you can't reduce your emissions, which most people will never be able to do. You pay someone else to do it for you. And you creating this unique economic incentive that's never existed before, that I think is so exciting. Like, it's now possible for conservationists to be profitable. Usually conservation is a cost, or it's charity, right? But now it's actually, you can create a business on selling carbon, right? Carbon offsets. You can find all these unique points in the economy, these little inefficiencies where we can effectively reduce emissions that otherwise wouldn't be reduced. And we can sell those as offsets. And so companies have a really efficient, cost-effective way to support, emissions reductions. And conservationists, whether it's farmers, forest protectors, people capturing methane emissions, like there's a bunch of offset examples I can give here in a second. But for the first time ever, these people are able to sort of profit off of conservation. And this incentive is going to drive more and more and more. And that's why I'm really excited about it.
Let me summarize and see if I understand what you're saying. So we need to internalize an economic externality, because if we don't internalize it, then there's no reason to act for the companies that are creating the biggest issue here of climate change. And in order to internalize that economic externality, there's a few ways that could happen. Government intervention, they could say you must offset. Your consumers could demand that you offset. So it could come from a bunch of different angles, but either way, it needs to be internalized, where it becomes, as you said, and it's interesting to point out that this is an economic issue, it needs to become more expensive to pollute than to not, because that's the only way that we're going to see action actually take place that's going to cause the change that we need. And that action will take place through carbon offsetting, which you explained briefly. So let's talk about, unless there's anything you want to add in here, but I think the next segue here.
Interrupt real quick and point out that it's sort of offsets kind of tackle things on both sides, because they do, yes, if companies are volunteering to offset, they are paying more. So they have an incentive to pollute less. And this usually happens through like trade organizations. You'll see like the airline industry has created a sort of industry-wide framework that requires the airlines who participate to offset. So there's that bit you mentioned. That's the polluting being more expensive. But then it offsets also cover the other side, which is like the positive externality. If you're paying to internalize that externality, where does that money actually go? Well, if it goes to conservation projects, if you're tackling the issue from both sides, that's what's pretty cool about offsets.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Because essentially what we're saying is polluting less is just not a solution that we're capable of. And we don't need to get into why and our need for more and the need for a better lifestyle. We don't need to talk about that. You talked about that briefly at the beginning, but the solution is, as a business, to offset. And when you offset, you can do that yourself, but more likely you're actually putting money in somebody else's hands where they can conserve and create limitless amounts of projects that can be positive for the planet.
Yeah. Again, just to cover my ass here, like, reducing emissions is always number one.
For sure.
But it's just not possible to reduce all your emissions. And this is when you offset.
We're not all going to stop flying. We're not all going to stop using tech. We're not all going to stop heating our houses, using cars. So,
right.
Okay, so tell us about the current structure of the carbon offset market. Like, how does that work? And maybe you can give us an example. You mentioned airlines, like, maybe there's an example of Delta or Southwest or an airline of how they are doing it.
I guess I'll start from the perspective of the project developer. So this is like the person who is creating the carbon offset and selling it. And so they're the one really on the ground doing the conservation. I think a really clear, the easiest example to highlight is landfill gas capture. So I don't know if you knew, but landfills, they actually reduce a lot, or they emit a lot of methane. And that's just from decomposition of trash. And it's not that expensive to actually drill in and set up infrastructure to capture that methane before it's released into the atmosphere. But again, economic externality, landfills have zero incentive to do that unless regulation happens, which it is starting to happen, thankfully. But, for the places where there's no regulation, right?
Right.
What if you could just go and pay these people some money to start capturing their methane? Well, that's exactly what landfill gas capture offsets do. So just a kind of high level summary, the way it typically works is someone will identify this opportunity. They'll say, hey, we're not capturing this landfill gas. We could probably make some money doing so, and then selling that as offsets. And so they'll work with a financier who will put up the money to help them install, to help them get verified. And this verification piece is really, really key. You have to prove you're actually capturing that gas. And you have to calculate what that is in carbon tonnage equivalent, right? To do so, you work with third-party nonprofits. The biggest one is Verra. They have like rigid methodologies that they've defined. There are a bunch of others, and these often operate as kind of registries to sort of distribute your carbon offsets once you're verified. And so, you'll work with your financier, you'll get registered, you'll get on Verra's registry, they'll finally approve you and send you your offset credits, and then you're free to sell them. And so, the financier probably has a claim on most of those, so they'll probably take it from there, and then hopefully they're able to make a markup as well. And, everyone's happy. Finally, the person who's offsetting, maybe it's Delta Airlines, maybe it's a customer of Delta who checked that box that said, I want to offset this flight. Mm-hmm. They'll consume that offset credit and they'll do what's called a retirement, which is basically destroying that offset so no one else can ever claim it. And so that ton has been claimed, it's been used, and the cycle's complete.
You have two sides to this market. You have those that are creating the carbon offset and then putting it onto the market. And then you have those that are polluting, the Delta Airlines, that is purchasing the carbon offset and then retiring it, as the terminology used. Okay.
Yep.
Does this work the way this market currently operates? How big is this market? Like, how many carbon offsets are flowing through? How many dollars are flowing through?
So the voluntary carbon offset market, and this is a kind of term I hadn't really fleshed out, it's about $1 billion, which I think is pretty small, actually. It needs to be a lot bigger. The compliance market, which is where actually like cap and trade, carbon, different types of government mandated carbon allowances or carbon offsets are traded, is much bigger. But this isn't the market that KlimaDAO is interested in. KlimaDAO is interested in the voluntary carbon market.
Okay.
And so, yeah, again, it's about $1 billion. It's growing really fast, but it needs to scale up.
Define what you mean by voluntary.
So voluntary is basically, there's no government stepping in saying you have to offset. These are maybe trade organizations agreeing to do it, or companies agreeing to do it to comply with their ESG goals. These are like investors and, the BlackRocks of the world telling their portfolio companies, like, you guys need to have a strong ESG and climate action plan. And so companies elect for the emissions they can't reduce to offset. So they'll go out into the market and they'll buy the offsets themselves and retire them voluntarily, covering, the amount of emissions that they've decided for themselves to cover. So how does this work? Actually, it works over email and phone. And I've heard even fax.
And fax.
I've heard. I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of the meme, right? Like,
okay, so this market is in the Stone Age, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, and it's tough. Like, I experienced this firsthand. There's absolutely no pricing transparency. If someone's offering me a project, they're saying, I've got landfill gas capture tons that you should retire for your ESG, and I'll charge you $100 a ton, right? You have no frame of reference. Is that good or bad, right? So what you have to do is email a bunch of brokers, get a bunch of quotes, talk to other companies. What are they buying? What did they pay? Look on the online storefronts that sell the often way overpriced offsets with huge markup, right? And you don't know how much of that money ever went to the original project developer. How many times has this credit changed hands, right? It's problematic. Layers of middlemen, obscure pricing, deals over the counter. And then it's also hard to get on the carbon registries. Like, if you wanted to be a broker, you wanted to maybe buy a bunch of carbon up front, it's tough. You got to go through these approval layers and, you need to learn the whole market inside and out. Also, last bit, no automation. Like, the registries don't have APIs. So as a dev, it's really frustrating. If I want to even start a carbon offset business or storefront, I'm doing this by hand. I'm going on the registry and clicking through UIs and then sending it to customers. It's a nightmare. So enter KlimaDAO.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, great lead in. We've got this market that is the best option for us to fix climate change, and it's completely inefficient. It's non-verifiable. It's impossible to become a part of it. And so we desperately need a solution. I don't even think we need to explain how it would be like if you wanted to enter the stock market and the only way to buy a stock was to send an email, and then you had to call a bunch of people to verify that that stock was actually the stock you're getting, and you couldn't actually trust it. You didn't even know I can't even imagine. It's just crazy that is the case of this market. So enter KlimaDAO. How do we solve this? How are you guys solving this?
Imagine a world where all these carbon offsets are on the blockchain. You could see exactly who was buying and selling, what price they were paying. If you had a wallet, you could walk up and press send, and the transaction would execute and the offsets would be in your wallet. Or, send another transaction and instantly retire those offsets. That was sort of the vision we had. I think a lot of us saw that, but there are huge question marks, how do we get there? And so this was back in October 2021. The way I like to tell the story is there was this huge Death Star laser beam of capital called DeFi, and we kind of aimed it at the carbon market, and it worked. And so that sort of Death Star laser beam capital is it was basically the Olympus model. We were a fork originally of the Olympus protocol. We looked at their incentives. We saw how they were sort of incentivizing liquidity, incentivizing users to put liquidity in their treasury. And we said, this is it, right? This is how we bootstrap this market and incentivize tons to come on chain. And that's what we did, right? So the state of the market now, we're essentially the sole reason that liquidity and demand exists for a bunch of carbon assets. And right now, the assets you can get on Polygon are the base carbon ton, the nature carbon ton, the universal basic offset, the nature-based offset, and the Moss MCO2 forestry tokens. And there's millions of dollars of liquidity for these now. 25.4 million tons of carbon have already been tokenized, and 17 million tons of carbon or carbon liquidity are in our treasury, in KlimaDAO's treasury. So that's equivalent, 17 million tons is like 500 million liters of gas worth of carbon.
Wow.
It's a lot. So the impact's been huge. It's been a really wild ride, but sort of the thesis worked. Launch went well. I mean, we achieved the goal we wanted to achieve. It's now possible for people to interface with our smart contracts. We're writing tools that let anyone access these offsets, retire them instantly. You can now automate the whole buying, selling, and offsetting flow. And it's all open source. It's all permissionless. All you need is a wallet.
Making it much easier for anybody to offset carbon in a verified way. I mean, it makes so much sense. It actually almost smacks you in the face. It makes so much sense.
One thing I'm really excited about, because I kind of talked about the liquidity, I haven't elaborated much on really how we pulled that off, but basically we've got the tons on chain, we've got liquidity, so we can handle a lot of volume of trade, of retirement. And now it's about sort of building the tooling out, right? So making the whole experience of offsetting better, making it easier for like companies, brokers to get onboarded and start interacting with what we're calling now the digital carbon market. And one thing we just launched that really is a huge step in this direction is a product called Carbon Mark. Basically what this does is it lets brokers and project developers list their tons directly on the market so anyone can buy them directly. And they don't have to really care about what is a liquidity pool or what is Klima and what are these bonds and all this stuff that we have, this blockchain mumbo jumbo. They can just say, I've got projects. I know these are good tons. I know what people want to pay for them, and they'll put them up for sale. And likewise, buyers can walk up and say, I want to offset this project, this year, this methodology. It's all super easy. And we're trying to abstract away all the Web3 stuff as much as we can and really let Web3 be the tech, and focus on the offsetting.
Right. Right, which is something that we talk about so much on the show is you can't expect a person who is not a techie person to all of a sudden understand Web3 in and out. You need to present it to them in a way that just makes their life easier, and they don't need to think about the tech that's behind that. They just want to be able to sell their carbon in an easier way, right? So Let's focus on the sellers for a second. On the seller's side, right now, a seller has to go get registered. So are you eliminating the registries? Are you working with them? How does that work?
So we don't want to touch registry of carbon offsets. So like verification of carbon, this is a big rabbit hole, and like tons of work's been done in this space. Tons of research goes into these methodologies, proving that a forest has been conserved or that gas has been captured. So we don't want to be the gatekeepers of like so-called quality of carbon offset or verification. We really defer to the experts for that. So Vera and Gold Standard, these were the tons we initially onboarded. They have not been as receptive as we've hoped. I think they got a bit freaked out by the sheer volume of carbon we were pulling on chain. And so they said, basically, you're not allowed to take tons off Vera. So now what we're doing is we're working with more Web3 competent registries. So we're talking right now with Eco Registry, who are a Colombian registry, mostly dealing with conservation forestry credits. They've been awesome to work with, really, really cool projects, and they're helping us interface directly with the registry, which should make it really easy for project developers to onboard their projects. We're talking with pretty much every registry to try and do whatever we can to make sure that developers who want to bring, or brokers who want to bring their carbon onto the digital carbon market can do so safely, securely, easily.
Right. And so from the seller side, I can do it in a much easier way, and I can access a liquidity pool without even knowing what a liquidity pool is necessarily. Like I'm eliminating all the middlemen, I'm sure, who are probably taking a whole bunch of fees and a lot of money. So by the time that carbon offset gets into the hands of a buyer, who knows what percentage is actually going through. Whereas in your case with Carbon Mark, it's a direct interaction.
Exactly. So, I mean, of course, we want to work with everyone. Like, we don't want to put anybody out of business. I think there's a lot of overlap.
Unfortunately, that is the nature of disruption sometimes.
Yes.
I appreciate the sentiment.
Well, there's like a Venn diagram of brokers and project developers, and some of them are both. And it's obviously more complicated. It's not like we're just stepping on the toes of all the people who've built businesses in this space. And you want to make it easy for brokers as well. Maybe project developers don't all want to be listing their tons directly. They'd rather just do a deal with a financier and wash their hands and be done with it. On to the next one.
Yeah.
But that is sort of the long-term vision, right? I think people might see that they can just walk up to Carbon Mark and get an instant price quote on a category of carbon offsets on the specific vintage year they're looking for. And, I think project developers might realize, hey, I can put my tons directly on here and find these buyers.
Right.
It's going to take time. It's, we have a lot of work to do before we get to that point.
Let's talk about the buyer's side for a second. So with something like Carbon Mark, who are you expecting that the buyers will be? Or even so far through what the work that you guys have done, who have the buyers been? Are you getting large organizations that are buying these offsets? Is it more individuals participating?
So we're kind of in this transitionary phase where we're, gain legitimacy within Web3. We've gotten a bunch of DeFi and crypto orgs to offset, huge volumes. We got Polygon to offset their whole blockchain using us. And we're working with groups like Flight Air. They're a small airline that's very kind of crypto oriented, DeFi oriented, and they're going to be integrating KlimaDAO retirements directly into their app. So we're transitioning now and looking for legitimacy in the market at large. So we're after pretty much any organization who's looking to offset, and we're trying to show them that, hey, look, these tons are more traceable. The pricing is more transparent. It's easier for you to get access to these, and you can automate with them. So a lot of discussions ongoing, still some work to do to sort of polish the UI and make everything friendly. And every day we're kind of dealing with new problems that no one's solved before related to like, how do you get like a consultant, a crypto wallet? Well, what if their consultant has 10 clients? Do they manage 10 wallets for their clients, right? These sort of problems we're solving day by day, really working hard to get there.
I hope they get a ERC 4337 wallet so that it's much easier to manage seed phrases. We're doing a series on wallets right now, so it's been interesting to go down that rabbit hole. But that's not the purpose of today's conversation. If you guys are listening, go check out the series on wallets if you want to learn more about those and account abstraction and what that allows. Okay, so come back to Carbon Mark for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you at? It just launched last week, was it?
Yeah, we just sort of announced it last week. I was hoping it'd be live by now, but unfortunately bugs are there. So we're squashing the last few bugs. I think next week we'll see it go live and we'll start onboarding sellers and getting people offsetting. So pretty exciting.
Very exciting. What's the vision? What's on the roadmap? Is Carbon Mark the focus? Is the focus just to get more buyers and sellers onto Carbon Mark? Are you building other things? What's the roadmap moving forward?
Yeah, we want to obviously start seeing some volume come through Carbon Mark. I think I'd really love to see some exclusive tons go up. We're working on that. That means some projects that you can't find anywhere else, but only on Carbon Mark. Because I think it's really neat to showcase the transparency side and the activity feed that shows trades, knowing that this ton originates from the project developer or the broker or the financier themselves coming from the source. I'd love to see that as a showcase. So we're talking to a bunch of people and they're pretty much ready to go. So hopefully we'll see that maybe in a couple of weeks.
Sorry, just ask one quick question there, Atmos. Are you building the interface in a way that it makes that easy to see, where I can see not just that I bought this carbon credit, but like this is where it came from and this is what the activity that project is doing in order to create the offset?
Yeah, we've started really simple, minimum viable product approach at first. And we've just got a feed that shows when someone lists, when someone changes the price, and when someone buys. And what we need to get in there is connect that to the actual originating tokenization event. And we'll get there. I think in a couple weeks or months, we'll sort of close the whole loop. So you'll be able to trace your ton from retirement back to even the original verification on the registry.
Which is huge. I'm sure it's possible right now through the most inefficient, as you said, emails, phone calls, and maybe a couple faxes in order to get there. Whereas now you'll be able to do it. You won't even need to do anything. It'll just happen.
Right. It's huge. What's so cool is I barely had to do anything as a dev. Like, this is just what you get when you work on Polygon. This is what you get when you work in Web3. It's awesome. That's something that's worth kind of talking about. I mean,
expand on that.
We couldn't have done this in Web 2. Like, obviously, a competent web developer could build a sort of the equivalent of a token. They could build like a centralized exchange or like a marketplace. They could do everything we're doing with Web 2, like, with JavaScript or whatever. But they would need millions of dollars in liquidity, right? If they wanted to create a marketplace at the scale that we have, they would need to put up all that money themselves.
Right.
We didn't have to do that. We turned to DeFi, right? They would have had to cross like regulatory and banking hurdles to hold all those assets and all that money. And lengthy bureaucratic processes, right? They'd probably have to get write-off from registries. They'd probably have to talk to liquidity providers and money managers and et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have to do any of that. We just set up the incentives and put up the smart contracts, and the community did the rest, right? On the code side, like, I don't have to write complex market making code and make sure that there's no double spending or going on or anything like that. I just use primitives that have been tried and tested in DeFi, these sushi swap pools, ERC20s. That's it.
Yeah, it's incredible the power of open permissionless code, open permissionless infrastructure. I don't think we fully appreciate it yet because we're still so early. We haven't seen, we're seeing it, but we haven't seen it at the level that it's going to achieve.
I agree completely. I think Carbon is really this slam dunk use case. I'm excited to see where people take this. Like, I think there might be other asset classes. I could not name one. I'm sure there are. It's just Carbon is just such a perfect use case. I'm really surprised no one had done it yet.
Right. I love it. Okay, just to wrap up Carbon Mark, if somebody wants to use Carbon Mark, where do they go? How do they check it out?
I would say follow us on Twitter. CarbonMark.com is our handle, and you'll see the announcement come out in the next couple of days when you can finally poke around the marketplace and look at some projects. When we launch, we'll have, I believe, the largest variety of carbon offset projects of any online storefront, which is incredible. And that's because Carbon Mark is a view across all the liquidity pools. All those tokens I mentioned earlier, like BCT, NCT, UBO, MBO, those will all be available through the Carbon Mark interface. You'll see real-time pricing, so you're getting the best price. And we'll start onboarding sellers and letting anyone, list their carbon directly and at the price they choose.
Incredible. When you say it's the best use case, you're accurate. The thing is, why isn't it a use case that's captured the attention of more people? Is it because climate change is just too difficult to understand and carbon offsetting is too difficult to understand? Is it that the individual doesn't participate in carbon offsetting? It's only, a few people that have the control of these budgets at large corporations?
All of the above, I guess. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, crypto's going through sort of growing pains. Like, we're getting over this speculative phase, and people are really asking where are the use cases. And so they're sort of dismissive of what KlimaDAO did, because we took, there were a lot of Olympus forks, and none of them really had solid use cases. But ours did, and it worked to pretty incredible effect, building liquidity for carbon assets. That's like a concept that people don't even know what liquidity means, right?
Yeah,
carbon assets, how can you have carbon as an asset, right? And offsetting, it's such a complicated thing. So it's going to take time, and it's also going to take a lot of work for me and my team to simplify this stuff, to get the language right, to figure out who that real target audience is for this stuff, right? Moving away from this degenerate crypto scene who birthed us into really legitimizing ourselves against other carbon market players, the brokers, the registries. It's going to be an uphill battle, but I think that, the use case is too strong and the value we bring, it's too valuable. So I don't think they could ignore us.
Well, and as you mentioned, you have an issue where the existing organizations that participate in this market are scared of change. Naturally, everyone's afraid of change. Change is a scary thing. You lose control when you accept change. And you've already found that with the registries, some of them not wanting to participate anymore because they don't quite understand what's going on. And so that's the uphill battle of building disruptive tech and building disruptive. You don't have buy-in in the beginning from all sides. You often have sides that actually the opposite might happen, and they might fight back or they might not want to participate. So it's a challenge on so many levels, which is why what KlimaDAO is doing is so, deep bow, tip my hat, like salute emoji. You guys are really tackling such a big issue.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, uphill battle, a lot of work to do. Crazy story. I think I'm glad I get a chance to come here and tell it.
Yeah, we are too. Okay, before we jump to a speed round, anything else you want to share today? Maybe you want to tell everybody to go offset some carbon. I'm not sure. Any final thoughts?
I think I pretty much covered it. I hope I did a good job of sort of weaving the story from climate change as a problem to the solutions, the idea of economic externalities, and then how an offset works and how an offset fits in. And then, of course, how we enhance carbon offsetting. It's a lot to unpack, but I would just say, yeah, people should check out our KlimaDAO official Twitter and Carbon Mark Twitter if they want to learn more. Our content team is doing a really good job of unpacking these topics, and we've got some serious big brain carbon market experts on the team trying to help people get up to speed. So yeah, check it out.
If I want to go, somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh, I want to go off, I'm inspired, Atmosfearful, thank you, I want to participate. Can anybody go to Carbon Mark and offset carbon?
Soon. Right now, we've got our what we call the retirement aggregator. This is like a janky little UI we've been slapping features on over the last year that allows you to do a bunch of stuff like offset carbon out of any token, starting with USDC, even with a credit card, actually. So you can offset whatever you want. You can browse the projects and pick the one you like and offset with that one. And any amount.
$1, $100, any amount.
Yep, exactly. And then we've got these climate pledges, so you can actually connect those retirements and offsets that you hold to a little dashboard that you can share and show people like your progress towards your climate goals. So we're really just showcasing everything you can do, proof of concept after proof of concept. And Carbon Mark's going to be the way we kind of polish them all, tie them all together, focus them on the right audience. But yeah, you can do everything already. That's at app.klimadao.finance. We'll see the offset tab there. I believe we just launched the buy carbon tab. So now you can actually look through all of the projects that are on chain and then buy them with USDC and put them in your wallet. That might come in handy if you want to become a carbon broker and you see some good value carbon that you want to, maybe set up a storefront on Carbon Mark.
Right.
Tons up for sale.
There you go. Wow. Fascinating. So many layers. Okay. We also were going to talk about the DAO and what it's like to participate in a DAO, but we've taken up the full episode today. Not surprising with the topics that we've already discussed. So we're going to skip the DAO this time, but I am curious, maybe in the future, we'll get you back on Atmos and talk about what it's like working in a DAO and the challenges and benefits of it. I know you guys have had, both your challenges and you've had great wins coming out of working in a DAO compared to a traditional organization. So in the future, we'll get you back for that.
Sure. I'd love to. Let's do it.
Okay. Speed round coming at you. Some final questions. First, what's one prediction for the year ahead for 2023?
Ooh, prediction. I think the digital carbon market is going to be like the single largest source of new users for DeFi and blockchain. I think that the people who are coming at the end of 2023, the new users, the first time crypto users, I think most of them will be showing up because they want carbon, they want to offset, they want to put up their projects for sale, they want to participate in the digital carbon market. Because again, I think it's just such a slam dunk use case.
Wow. Bold, hot take, big prediction coming at you. Okay. Next, a must read book.
Must read book. Climate Casino by William Nordhaus. He was like a Nobel laureate 2018 for economics. And he just does this amazing walkthrough on climate science and climate economic modeling and the policy solutions that I talked about. So everything I was rambling about as far as economic externalities and policy solutions and offsetting, he discusses and explains much better than I ever could. So definitely a must read book.
Okay. Favorite AI or Web3 tool to increase productivity?
This was a tough one because I think mostly my tools are all JavaScript. I think, just straight up writing code, but like, I guess I'm really happy with Taurus Wallet. We talked briefly about the usability of Web3. This is like, we're exploring with moving users towards Taurus, and so far I've been incredibly happy. This idea of a social login that everyone's familiar with, like Google, but then getting this crypto wallet, maybe for a lot of users, your first ever crypto wallet, and being slowly introduced to these concepts like an address and a balance, etc. This is something I'm really excited for, Taurus. So I think people should check that out.
Okay. Wow. We should have gotten Taurus in our wallet series. We'll be sure to link to that one in the show notes as well. Okay. Last question. If you had a billboard that 1 billion people were going to see, what would you write on it?
Bullish on offsets.
Nice.
No one's saying that.
Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that. They will be. They will be after they listen to this show. Atmos, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for you and the whole team for all your work. You are taking on a massive project that is just a huge win for all of us. And yeah, I can't imagine the challenges that you're facing along the way. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks so much for listening in, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy. We hope this helps you along your Web3 journey. And if it does, please share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Nothing in this podcast was financial advice. Crypto and Web3 can be risky. You can literally lose it all. In fact, if you invest on account of what we say, you probably will lose it all. So don't do that. In all honesty, the point of this podcast is to remove the noise of markets and price and focus on utility and implementation anyway. So you should not take any of this as financial advice. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.